This is a reading from the notebooks 1945 to 1950 by Maria Valtorta. I started August 17th, 1945. I received an offensive letter from my cousin, who, since he cannot justify himself and feels stricken by the truth I stated, gave me a nip. I suffer, not so much on account of the offense, as because in him I find once again the old Giuseppe, as I have known him for 25 years. Neither Satan nor God has changed him. This judgment, if he were to read it, would make him fall into a frenzy, for he is convinced he is perfection, and that poor unfortunate does not know that my judgment is the last one to come down, even after the Lord's severe words for them. Footnote 77, see notes 44, 45, and 71, to censure their way of acting. I continue to love them with painful, but always true affection. The branches of this plant of affection have fallen one by one under the systematic hatchet blows of their deceitful, strange behavior, selfish and wicked in my regard. And now the plant is dead, having also become like the petrified ones Jesus spoke about. Did I suffer? Yes, I also wept, but I decided not to respond in like manner. Do not say that I act this way out of virtue. It is simply because I have reached that point of nausea and weariness which impedes every stimulus to appetite or movement. In my personal state, is this a disturbance? Very much so, for my poor body already tortured, and even more for the superior part, which does not get upset. That would be an exaggeration, but is ruffled by the blows of wickedness. But I repeat what I previously said. Even if this affection dies, all the better. I now live only for supernatural love, and I love relatives, friends, or simply my fellows, breaking against my bed like a wave, only for their souls, and my only concern is to provide assistance to these souls. Everything else, faces, actions, clothing, comforts, or material indigence, is cancelled out for me. I see and hear souls, only souls. And this too is suffering. That is why I said to you this morning, I told Jesus that if I am an obstacle for souls to drink at your fount, take away the obstacle by taking away my life. Why, of course, it would be so beautiful to depart and leave the reservoirs open, which Jesus has given for all, and which lie there stagnant, without the thirsty drinking from them. How thirsty I am for souls, for there are so many dead ones, but also very many who are thirsty. And Jesus makes me understand this. And they are not just the souls of people who know about the spokesman and the dictated work, but also souls enclosed in beings who know nothing about this, and who, burdened with their sorrows, nevertheless go in search of the word, which would be their Cyrenean. Footnote 78. We pass over about 1,400 pages containing the episode Jesus Talks About Hope from the second year of the public life. August the 18th, 1945, for Sister Gabriella of Mary Immaculate, 79. See note 4. I am not inclined to grant private direction, not out of hardness of heart, but out of mercy on the spokesman and souls too. People must be fortified on their own in order for there to be true fortitude, but she now needs a word, and I will provide it. You spoke the first phrase of the cross for yourself, not understood, and taken lightly, and for me, offended in my orphans, who never receive an offense which is not healed by me. In the times of the old law, this was already said, have mercy on the widow and the orphan. Footnote 80. Exodus 22, verse 21, Jeremiah, chapter 22, verse 3, and Zechariah, chapter 7, verse 10. I said, I will be the father of those who have no father, and whom the world disdains. My army and my court have been composed of the humble and unfortunate. There have been sinners, slaves, peasants, and orphans, and among them the martyrs of the sins of others. The fatherless have not been lacking. They have never been lacking, and have not been inferior to the others in affirming the kingdom of Christ among peoples. Who can judge that heaven, or the priesthood, or the cloister is the prerogative of those benefited by a normal family? Are a birth certificate and assorted other documents needed here to gain access to the joy of heaven? Holiness is needed here to enter. Nothing more than this. For birth certificates are signed for what perishes, not the soul. The soul is not born when you are born on earth. Its birthday takes place the day on which it comes to God to receive its eternal peace. Those who are called to judge concerning the most delicate circumstances should bear this in mind. What would you say about God if he denied heaven to someone born illegitimate? That it was an act of injustice. Why then do you deny the way which for them is the way of heaven, to these children who aspire to me, and whom I inhale into myself? The child did not ask to be born. The crime is not his. The cross is his. The sins of parents should not be brought down upon their children. I said, judge not, for you do not know the circumstances under which someone committed a sin. Judgment falls to me alone. Why then do you judge twice in this case, once for the child, and again for his parents? In reality, the old Israel with its Pharisaic forms, lacking charity, has risen again, stronger than before, egged on by rationalism, which leaves people in a daze regarding the supernatural, and by the new Jansenism, chilling off and creating obstacles for souls. This does not amount to proceeding towards the lights of the last time, but retroceding, not only to pre-Christian times, but rather to the inhuman, obscure methods of the pagan peoples. For my road is now obstructed, the one I have called people too, and this is done against my will. You preach that it is not licit to oppose a son's vocation. You say this to parents, even if they receive all comfort and help from that son, for you say that God is more than a parent. That is correct. I too said so. But why then do you contend with me over these children? But if you were enlightened and united to the Holy Spirit, you would have to see all my mercy in this call. You would have to see all my power. If from two quagmires who joined to procreate in sin, there is born a flower whom I call for my altar. In these tenacious vocations which you disparage, you ought to see and feel the sign of the fatherhood of God, who demands his rights and opens his arms to call women, whom the world would profane and whom you drive away, spouses of the only begotten Son. Poor souls, do you deem them unworthy of approaching the altar as an object, if I do not deem them unworthy of approaching me? I would like to say this to those who offend me through the innocent ones who weep and ask for mercy without finding it, through these whom you push back into the impure waves of the world, calling them fruit of the world, whereas if you had charity, justice, and prudence, precisely because they are a fruit of the world, you ought to gather them in to place them in God's granaries, protected from the lure and the inheritance which could destroy what God with goodwill created. I would like to say this, and also have you consider that along with the temptation of the world, you give the desolation of doubts about God and his goodness to these flowers, that in their lower part have the appetites common to everyone born of woman, which are sometimes aggravated by forms of atavism that only grace and conviction regarding God's love hold back. But it would be useless for me to say this to those who deny all that is not themselves. I thus speak to you, Gabriella of Mary Immaculate. You have humbled your humanity in the humility of requesting, explaining, and seeing that you are not understood. You have bowed to humility towards men, and the suffering has been very great. Now listen to me. I am more than men, and my wisdom and justice are perfect. Superiors are there to form people in virtues, but I am there to crown them, and I am intervening because it is now the time not to make your energy not only futile, but harmful, because it is compressed in a highly circumscribed mission in which you would be a non-entity barely able to be saved, and always on the point of not being saved. For the imprudent goal and bitter experience of these days would create an intimate but active state of distrust and judgment regarding blind and superficial superiors. It is not licit for you to contribute with the proud ones of the new Israel to the ruin of hearts, but gathering in these hearts so that they will not be lost means to love the place you entered. Wrest yourself away from it with the laceration of your fibers. Go out to face the future alone, and suffer harsh criticism and accusations of a lack of love, pride, and volubility from your superiors, companions, and the world. For each person who shows comprehension, there will be 1,000 who deride you. Think it over. It means knowing the tremendous solitude of those struggling alone against customs, preconceptions, and stubbornness. Reproaches, mockeries, hours of doubt, disappointments, straitened circumstances, anguish, all of this is in store for you if you gather in the hearts which I have called and to which I want to give paternity, a name, a home, a spouse, and children. Paternity, God's, a name, daughters of God, a home, mine, a spouse, myself. Children, the ones for whom they will pray and work. This is because I want them to know that God is good, so that they may never think that God is just like those who condemn them as profaned objects, without justice or charity. Taking them in means suffering at all times. It means being consumed more quickly and with increased sufferings. It means having to abandon the sweet ministry when you have placed every affection therein. It means experiencing the responsibility of a real mother who has no mother house, no superiors, nothing behind her, but who is just like a mother, devoid of help, who has been left alone in the midst of a brood of children to be brought to adulthood. And the anguish of a mother who dies, leaving behind little orphans who are not yet adults, is tremendous. It is a moral agony, and in your case spiritual too, added to physical agony. What you have experienced until now is nothing in comparison to what you could experience and will experience if you say the second phrase among those I indicated to you. Everything is accomplished. In my passion, I said to the Iscariot, a perpetual representative of all who have the mission of bringing pain to their fellows, do quickly what you still have to do. On Calvary, I admitted that everything was accomplished, and not just by me. Men had also accomplished everything that had to be done to create that hour. Now, too, men have done everything that was to be done to give you your passion. It is now up to you to consummate it to the point of being able to say, everything is accomplished, to keep these hearts safe for God. Do you have the courage to say this? Do you have the courage to do this? Observe that up to this point you have drunk the chalice, but now the sponge with gall is waiting for you, and vinegar upon your bleeding wounds, in darkness and abandonment. Do you have the strength to cling to heaven alone, even if heaven seems far away? You will know the passion, in all its complex cruelty, if you devote yourself to this mission. I am not a deceiver. I exhibit the picture in all its shades, so that no one will say, I did not know, and be at fault because of not knowing. I give you this assistance of a clear exposition of the future, just as, in spite of the times, I prompted financial aid for the projected work, and I have given you my viaticum to support you, console you, calm you, and temper your tenacity with my gentleness. Gabriella of Mary Immaculate, they can all deceive you. I cannot. For months I have been forming you for this work. Reread the messages I gave against everyone's will, plucking up courage myself, and only because you are you, in special circumstances affecting you as a woman and a nun. The sick person full of life, and the soul has not yet found the stable balance which is complete, guileless abandonment in me. The first text contains the statement, wherever Christ's bride goes, the ring of charity goes with her. The second, there are two phrases which are so sublime that I, the Word, said them at the most solemn moments in my life. Here I am, let it be done. But they were never spoken without tears. The third, always consider, what will Jesus say about what I am doing? And if you feel that Jesus is content, go ahead without fear. In the fourth, my mother said, go to Jesus with the golden rose of your charity. In the fifth, I previously blessed you for this hour, saying, peace and blessing to those who live with them in love for me. May the blood and the word create ever new strength in you. The sixth, which was not given to you because it was too severe, and it was not the time for you to savor it, contains the statement, let each, with personal exertion, extract the precious diamonds of wisdom. The seventh, make your heart expand more and more through its complete openness to me. In the 8th I said to you, Go with my peace. I would not have said so if I had not approved your going. In the 9th I repeated to you my viaticum of peace and indicated the words of the cross. I have never contradicted myself as a friend and master, and I am now speaking in the capacity of a king. The last time I even said the great phrase to Maria, Women, here are your children. But I then said to Maria, There are still tears to be shed before saying that phrase to her. It will be the last one for her. Wait before writing to her. I now advise you to isolate yourself with your soul and with me. Isolate yourself. Listen to yourself. Contemplate yourself and gauge yourself, and also contemplate others in the days to come. In silence, ideas line up and become clear, like a drawing, and if you extract the word go from them, then don't hesitate any longer. Entrust your spirit to the Father, and die as Gabriella, to rise again as the mother of the most unfortunate orphans. I will then say to you, Mother, here are your children, the children of pain. If you want to be a mother, manage to stand upright at the foot of the cross, on the summit of Calvary, amidst mockery and disrespectful curiosity, to receive the most unfortunate portion of humanity. And name the foundation of Saint Veronica Giuliani, simply in order not to cut all ties to the order, recalling my Francis, who never rejected any form of indigence because he had understood Jesus, and also to recall the woman who on Calvary merited my face on the linen cloth. I will give you my face, impressed upon your heart, so that you will be loving, consoling, and expiating, like the first and the second Veronica. Go in peace, and may the charity of God, the grace of Jesus, and the light of the Holy Spirit be with you. Footnote 81. We pass over 2 handwritten pages containing the episode Jesus Goes to Carmel with James of Alphaeus from the second year of the public life. August 19th, 1945. But I do not go with them. Footnote 82. She is referring to the apostles and the episode mentioned in note 81. The rest of the passage should be understood in terms of the dictation on August the 18th, 1945. But I do not go with them after performing the charitable act of writing to Sister Gabriella. I follow Jesus, who from the slopes of Carmel turns around to give me the following words for Sister Gabriella. I remain the one who loved children, and these creatures are like children for me, and I would like there to be great love in the new house for Jesus, as one who loves children, while preserving great Franciscan love for the newborn Jesus and Jesus during the Passion. For this reason, I spoke about the Veronicas and gave them to you as patronesses. Footnote 83. We pass over 91 handwritten pages containing the second part of the episode dated August 19th, and 5 others dated August 20th to 24th, all from the second year of the public life. August 24th, 1945. This morning, after Holy Communion, I had a great desire to give Sister Gabriella something holy, and I had nothing at all. Jesus presented himself to me standing in a little meadow, in the shade of olive trees, in his white robe, and smiled, saying to me, Have 5 medals brought at once. I will bless them, and you shall send them to Sister Gabriella for herself and her daughters. But there are 3 girls. I said 5, and all of them alike. 2 more for Father Miorini and Marta? Yes, and act quickly, for there is work to be done. I sent Marta off on the run to get the medals. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the presence for me alone of Jesus, who went on looking at me and smiling. Marta came back. I took the medals in my hands and offered them, and Jesus opened his arms, previously folded, raised his right hand, and imparted the blessing. He smiled at me and blessed me too, and I felt caught up by a joy, a thrill, a soft flutter which if I could have moved, I would have let out by singing, walking. But I remained down, and then set about describing what I was seeing. Yet the joy of Jesus, so indulgent and filled with blessing, has lasted throughout the day, even amidst the agonies of a headache blinding me and driving me out of my wits. Footnote 84. We pass over 54 handwritten pages dated August 26th to 29th, 1945, containing 4 episodes from the second year of the public life. August 29th, 1945. I feel the need to record an act of goodness by the Lord here. Footnote 85, right after the episode written on August 29th, 1945. And it is the Christian death of my only uncle. Footnote 86. Aristide Fioravanti, of whose death the writer had received news on July 21st, perhaps initially by way of a concise postcard, which has been preserved from the religious home of the Bergamo Congregation of Charity. She was mentioning this again because she had received a letter which she attached to the notebook. The text read, Home, Bergamo, August 18th, 1945. Miss Valtorta, your uncle died on July 14th at 1 p.m. and died in a Christian manner at Christmas and Easter, here at the home. He always received the sacraments. Moreover, in these last months he did so a bit more often. A few days before dying, he received communion once again. You can rest assured that he prepared properly for death, saw it coming, and desired it, for he could not endure any longer, since in addition to his pains from deforming arthritis, which increased daily, he also had an intestinal disease which caused him great suffering and took him to the tomb. He accepted death peacefully and calmly, and was conscious until the end, losing consciousness only in the final 2 hours. He was always cared for with love by the physician, the sister in the ward, and the nurses. I, too, often went to see him, since I had known him for a number of years, as a result of the service we both engaged in at the main city hospital, and insofar as I could, in view of our scanty means, I also tried to satisfy his desires. You can be sure that divine mercy has received them with goodness. We are seeking to intercede for his good soul with holy masses, communions, and rosaries. He will also pray a great deal for you. He loved you very much and suffered immensely over you, both because he knew you were exposed to the bombings and because of a lack of news. Pray for me too, as I shall for you. Respectfully yours, Superior of the Community. For the events and persons mentioned here, see the autobiography, particularly the section devoted to Voghera in the second part. I feel the need to record an act of goodness by the Lord here, and it is the Christian death of my only uncle, rendered quite uneasy in relation to the good Lord by a series of very great misfortunes of all kinds, in addition to a discouraging and very painful illness which lasted exactly 40 years in an increasingly serious form. As a young man, he was so very devout and observant that, as a family joke, they called him the friar. He then became quite the opposite, very restless and rebellious, to the point of bordering on and perhaps reaching hatred, and I greatly suffered over this. When he wrote to my mother, who was his sister, the letters were a sequence of insults, derision of God, and curses for life, and for 2 wretched women, his wife, the first cause of his misfortunes, and his daughter, who had abandoned him after taking him from our home, so as to be free in her enterprises. Curses for his neighbor, curses for doctors and nurses, and so on, and I experienced such disgust that it was even physical, and yet when I thought of him, I felt so much mercy and affection, precisely because he was so unhappy to the point of refusing the only wealth and relief remaining for the unfortunate, God. And in addition, I loved him because he had been the occasion for great suffering and great grace for me. His coming to us in Voghera when ill had been marked by copious tears for me. He loved me, but he was restless and nervous and had no sympathy for anything different from his way of thinking. Perfectly fluent in French, English, and German, from me, a 10-year-old girl already advanced in French and muttering German, he demanded perfection in French and miraculous progress in German, which, by the way, I hated, and he would have liked me to become fluent then and there in English, which he wanted to teach me. I understand. His days as a paralytic were quite long, and he could not adjust to idleness. He wanted to fill his hours by acting as my language teacher, but I already had my studies, and if one considers that at 16 I had finished classical studies, one can grasp whether I had things to study. But he understood nothing. Original, like his sister, he wanted what he wanted, and whoever contradicted him was subjected to his tantrums, reproaches, accusations, and so on. And yet he loved me. He also called me pretty, Pobily, darling, Mary, and with his arms and hands free from the paralysis which had immobilized his lower limbs, he would make lovely little pictures for me, or prepare sweets, which I would eat with tears as sugar, for there was never a day when, egging on my mother with his complaints and accusations of indolence, sluggishness, and stubbornness on my part, he failed to get me punished by her, whose severity is still proverbial. And, adding pain to pain, his coming cost me separation from home, from father. My uncle, in fact, had only a paralysis caused by a fracture of the last vertebras, a fracture which occurred in England. But the doctors, who see and understand what they manage to, very little, had decided he had a lung condition in addition to a spinal problem. He died at age 84 of deforming arthritis, and never had lung disease over those past 40 years. But the fact is that for the learned doctors he had to have a lung condition, and his proximity to me, a girl, may God forgive me, was thus dangerous. But since the doctors who held that view had been close to mother since she was a child, and her dream was to shove me into boarding school, to mortify my character, as she said, an idea father combated obstinately, the only point where he stood up to his wife, I think mother, with the complicity of the doctors, played this card to succeed in her purpose, and father was not strong enough to say, then my brother-in-law will have to go. He limited himself to having mother write a page with the statement that it was she who wanted me to leave home, a page I found among the family letters, and I was put into boarding school. After 4 months, my uncle received admission and employment as a secretary at the civil hospital in Bergamo, but I remained in boarding school, losing the joy of being with my father in the final months of his physical and mental integrity. Afterwards, he was worn out, good, but with little memory and will, and I no longer received anything from him but the comfort of caresses and the agony of seeing him disabled. All of this on account of my uncle. These were the sufferings he had given me, the graces involved in encountering once again my Jesus at my boarding school, as if he had come back from a great distance, and had granted me a loving appointment there. After being glimpsed in the mists of childhood with the Ursulines, and then fading out of sight, not out of faith, but out of sight, my suffering Jesus, who at boarding school, perhaps because an excessively heavy cross was already on my shoulders, showed himself to me in all the smiling, pleasant delights of his extremely sweet heart. And I am what I am now because I then belonged to him totally, and for a long time, nourished there with deeply and intensely Christian life, in love with awareness of Jesus at that age, which already knew what it wanted, 10 to 16. I was later able to resist the many things which acted as a lever under my loving faith, to turn it over and destroy it. And there were so many. I got a number of jolts from age 18 to 25, but later, Jesus came for the 3rd time, and has not left me since. That is why I loved this uncle who died now, after the death of my mother, who, as usual, made the accusation beforehand that I would not come to the aid of and love my uncle. I at once took up caring for him by writing and sending money for his whims as a patient. In my will, I even made it obligatory for my heir to maintain his monthly check for the rest of his life. And at the same time, I spoke to him clearly about my way of thinking, my faith, my love for the good Lord, my devotion to the church, and so on. Do you know, I said at the close, that's the way I am, and that's how you should consider me. I do not judge you in your ideas, although knowing you lack faith brings me pain, because I know this takes away from you the only comfort you could have. But I ask you not to be disrespectful towards my ideas. And he understood. He understood me so well that he immediately received the sacraments, sending me the leaflet from his communion, like a poor child who wants to show he has been good. Poor uncle. The superior has now written me to say he became fervent and died serenely, in a Christian manner, speaking of me with affection as long as he could. Isn't this an act of the Lord's goodness? I worried so that at the thought that he would die without being in God's friendship, and God makes me happy by showing me that we do not pray and suffer to no end, and also that a frank profession of faith can arouse people forcefully and lead them back to God. Poor uncle, who died so alone. Will it also happen to me like that? Poor uncle who remained without news for so long on account of the war. but he will now know that I was just as anxious about him as he was about me during the months of war and the impossibility of writing letters. He now knows everything and is in peace. And since I am in a mood for stories about myself, I shall also tell you about an incident, establishing no connection with my uncle though, which is taking place for the third time in a few days. Waves of intense fragrance, of flowers and very fine incense, like styrax and similar resins, suddenly filling my room and then just as suddenly departing. Marta, too, perceived it yesterday, sitting at a distance from me, but it is very intense alongside my bed. I had not smelled those waves for months. Footnote 87. We pass over about 40 handwritten pages, August 31st to September 2nd, 1945, containing 3 episodes belonging to the second year of the public life.